All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the final session of Building Healing Communities. Thank you again for coming just a little early so that we could start right on time. A reminder that this session, like the others, is being recorded, so if you don't want your face on the recording, then you can switch off your video and leave it like that, or if you're happy for us to see your face, then please turn on your videos because that would be wonderful. Please keep your mics muted so that we don't have background noise and distractions during presentations, but if at any point you want to ask a question or make a comment, interact in any way, please put anything you would like into the chat section. We do have a Q&A scheduled for the end of this session. So any questions that you've got can be discussed then, any comments can be brought forward then. And our Q&A today is a bit longer than it has been on the other sessions. We don't have those deep dives afterwards, so please get as involved as you can in those in that Q&A, and feel free to bring forward any suggestions or ideas or recommendations that you've got as well. It doesn't have to be a question in that Q&A space. Great, now we've got, again, another jam-packed schedule, so I would love to introduce our first presenter today, which is Geraldine Harris, and she's a consultant at Equitable Childhoods and a PhD candidate at Griffith. She consults in leadership and change management. She consults in collective action and social pedagogy. She consults in complex systems and management and early childhood and family support. And she's currently completing a doctoral thesis on developing place-based leadership and social innovation. And she has authored a chapter in the Building Stronger Communities for Children and Families book that many of you have looked at for our pre-reading as well. So I would love to introduce Geraldine. If you could unmute your microphone. And start whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, just share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
You can see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I feel very privileged to be here today. It's a real pleasure to speak at this forum. I'm speaking to you here today from Kumba lands on the Gold Coast, and I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respects to elders past, present and emerging. A bit of background around transpirational leadership.
Geraldine, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I can't see your screen, which means it isn't being recorded for the YouTube. So could you stop sharing and then try resharing? I'm so sorry.
Not a problem. I'll try again. Is that coming up?
That's coming up. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, I said we could see it. We couldn't. Okay.
Okay, a little bit of background briefly about where transpirational, or the notion of transpirational leadership came from. My colleague, Dr. Jennifer Cartmel, and I have been working in this space for over 20 years, and we've noticed, especially over the last 10 years, there's been a shift towards more tribal understandings of what collective action is. We're seeing communities make note of that. And we started to have conversations with other people and between ourselves to start thinking, what has worked to change people's mindsets? How have we seen people open up to others rather than close down and shift to one way of working? For Jenny, it was very much around critical reflection. For myself, it was very much around contemplative practices. You'll notice the image on the screen there of the hongi, the Maori, very sacred tradition of breathing together. This was very important in my childhood. I moved from Wales to New Zealand as a 7-year-old, and New Zealand culture at the time and the education department actually taught the culture of Aotearoa. We had elders who used to visit us, and I remember being a little shy 7-year-old, and an elder brought me up in front of the class and leant her head against mine. She said, "We're breathing together. You're welcome on my land, little one. I know you hear me." And that stayed with me from a 7-year-old to now a 51-year-old woman. And it's really influenced my understanding. In that shared breath, I belonged. And I think that's where collective and community comes from. It is in our shared breathing together that we belong. We know as cultures, the notion of breathing and breathing across is right the way through anthropologically, through our faith, through prayer, through yoga, through our song lines. We breathe together, we sigh, we cheer. The breathing together helps us understand each other, and it's a gentle process. It's a process of generative facilitation. And I suppose that's where we came from with the notion of transpirational leadership. When we look at it from interpersonal neurobiology, Dan Siegel suggests that transpiration is a process of awareness that inspires us to rewire our brains to the reality that we're part of a living whole. Transpiration, as a term, signifies the process of breathing across. And I think as a culture and as a community of action, we need to breathe across together. The breathing across means all domains. Integration reminds us that the whole is always more than the sum of its parts. We retain our individual identities while joining in the we. And I think that's where we need to be tapping into how we ameliorate our unconscious bias and how we don't become tribalized in our ways of knowing and being. Siegel suggests that it's coming to the full realization that in fact we're part of an interconnected whole, an interconnected web of the flow of living things across time, which enables us to see the powerful role we can play in helping each other as we strive to heal. That process begins with ourselves and working on relationships to make a kinder and more compassionate world. It was always going to be problematic to try and explain what this was, so I'll probably just go through a couple of stories and use some quotes to help, I suppose, thicken the understanding of what transpiration is. When we breathe together with Otto Scharmer, he suggests that most cross-institutional change processes fail because they miss a starting point of co-sensing across boundaries. He suggests that we need infrastructures or holding spaces to facilitate processes across systems boundaries. And because they don't yet exist, organizations or interest groups go out and maximize their special interests against a whole, as if declaring war, instead of engaging practitioners in the larger systems in processes of sensing. As you can see, the image on the screen next to that quote shows just some of the collective clutter that we navigate as leaders. And I don't mean clutter as in a negative thing, because a lot of these things are so powerful and so important. But what it means is there is no one organization, no individual, nor one discipline that can navigate that alone. It is a process of togethering. Indigenous scholar Tyson Yunkaporta also says that sustaining systems cannot be manufactured by individuals or appointed committees, particularly in times of intense transition and upheaval. If you listen to many stories and discern deep and complex patterns emerging, you can usually determine what is real and what has been airbrushed for questionable agendas or corrupted by flash mobs of narcissists. Now, some of these are quite harsh in how they actually see things, and the reality of community is tribalism is not always that distinct. But we are seeing specific ways of knowing and being coming into communities and telling communities how to be and what to do, rather than communities actually co-creating what the movement looks like. The notion of transpiration really means that there's always room at the table for different ways of knowing and being, that you can still maintain your identity as self and within your own discipline, as well as being part of the collective whole. When thinking about how I actually articulate transpirational approach to leadership, I thought, what will I use? And I thought probably the perfect thing is this symposium. It has provided a transpirational approach to leadership. It starts off, you have Sarah, the wonderful Sarah, who provides a digital space, the virtual space for us to all to come together, to build healing communities and start that conversation. It is a process of encountering evidence, collective wisdom, as well as professional practice. Carl started us on the journey by telling us about the first 1,000 days and the importance and reminding us, allowing us to exhale, knowing that this process is actually nurturing what we believe in, which is making children's lives better. We had Elspeth, who reminded us to be trauma-wise, and her presentation highlighted the importance of re-encountering knowledge that risks getting lost in the collective clutter, and how important it is, even when we think we know we have it, just to be reminded and forefronted of what drives us. We had Uncle Robert, who discussed healing communities with Aboriginal Australians, which prompted me to think that if we were to ameliorate individual, familial, cultural, community, and ecological privilege in our system, then we need cultural humility. That cultural humility means that Indigenous ways of knowing and being are not an add-on, but imbricated and an essential part of our thinking as leaders. James made me question, do we pay enough attention to who runs the program, and what can we understand that peers play a powerful role as practitioners, as they resonate far more at times with other children? Judy provoked my thinking about how we better understand children, a subject very close to my heart and my studies. Her comments about how children's voices are not always spoken, rather they reverberate through their behaviours that express stories of their cultures, histories, bodies and experiences, reminding me of the 100 Languages of Children and Loris Malaguzzi, a timely reminder as we enter this process. Leslie Ann's image of the family on their iPads or surfaces with a child standing alone. So powerful, it spilt over into the deep dives in a conversation. Those deep dives told us about digital poverty in the COVID environment and made us realise there are things that we forget to remember. Gunay illustrated how powerful place was for refugee families and how child and family centres can provide culturally safe spaces and a sense of belonging in the community. Deep divers, 2 weeks in a row, held the idea that managers and principals need to be the institutional champions for integrated working, and that there can be no movement of the backbone without a head who holds the central nervous system of an organisation. Alexandra, with her amazing insights into community development, but what I inhaled from her topic was a question where she asked, what was your favourite leadership moment? We need to share these, we need to think about these, because these moments are what shape us as leaders. This was my embodied practice, my transpirational approach of engaging with the symposium, listening to others and making me realise that there are things I need to change, things I need to pay attention to, and how, when I start thinking with theory, those things kind of start to emerge ethically. It's using contemplative practices with self and processes of critical reflection with others that will enable us to start this journey once again and look at what's needed in the age of the virusine. We're stepping out into a culture right now that we have no idea what the future is. An unseen virus has changed the landscape of the earth, and we have no idea how it will reverberate through children or the epigenetic landscapes of children and families over the next generations. As we ethically emerge from the symposium, and this afternoon, the next sessions will talk about this, we look at evaluation and we look at policies. We look at organisational missions and how they shape our lenses of understanding. We need to know when we need to pay attention, but also when we need to step out of those lenses to ensure that our approach is ethical. We need to ensure that the governance is a multi-level governance, that we understand that no one organisation can hold the power in the community, that we need to work together with children, families, communities and the workforce to better understand and hear the voices of communities and act with them. Margaret Wheatley talks about letting go of hope, because hope is a desire of what we want for the future, and instead having a more mature relationship, that of faith. And faith, she says, is the confidence in the systems that we put together and the absolute confidence that they will work if we navigate together as we create the paths, as leaders, that we actually create the pathways as leaders as we step into them. Very fortunate as well within this process is the role of a neutral consultant, someone who can distill, disseminate, and look at the knowledge with a quiet eye, who's not involved necessarily in the emotions, the clutter, the passions that we share as leaders for early childhood. And we have that in the wonderful Pablo. So Transpiration really highlights the importance of plurality, and it reminds us that we need others to remind us what we forget to remember. This amazes me. I stumbled across this just before I started putting this presentation together. It says we already have this knowledge. We just need to pull it together in one place. Share the knowledge, use it to inform the systems change, and invest in those strategies that do work. And if anyone was around at the beginning of the Communities for Children program, they might recognize this quote, because it came from the National Agenda of Early Childhood in 2003. After the government had done extensive consultations within the Australian early childhood community. They'd curated knowledge. We know that this knowledge exists. We have the knowledge of Fiona Stanley, Fraser Mustard, Heckman, the list goes on and on, Sylvan, who told us about life course trajectories, how we do this work. But we need longevity, we need policy change that's actually going to support an investment into this sort of working. As I step out of this conversation of transpirational leadership, I breathe out with Margaret Wheatley, who says that leadership is an unshakable faith of people's capacity to be generous, creative, and kind. And we need to step into the world and open our eyes to what is possible instead of closing it down into one way of knowing and being. Collective action is not systems change. It is an entrance into systems change. And the processes that we actually use for collective action shape how we will know, be, and develop with children, families, and community. A transpirational approach is not a panacea, but it's just a mode of attention, advising us and reminding us to be ethical, that we need to go beyond our own learning horizons in conjunction with others that can see our leadership and feed back to us. And as I said, remind us of what we've forgotten to remember. In finishing off, I just wanted to say how exciting it was that with UNICEF in the last 2 days saying that early childhood was an essential service. And I think what a timely response as you're stepping into doing planning for building healing communities. It's an exciting time, and I'd just like to say thank you for allowing me to be involved. It has been a privilege.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you for lifting our eyes beyond ourselves and beyond our organisations and beyond silos, and seeing the broader picture and seeing how we can breathe across different disciplines and organisations and work together for children. I'm sure you've got lots of questions. We'll have some question time in a little while, but now we're going to get Craig Bradbrook to talk to you a little bit about what Geraldine mentioned in terms of multi-level governance and the kind of governance issues that we have. So Craig has had more than 15 years of experience in that area and working in multidisciplinary collaborations and establishing evaluation frameworks. He also managed the Northwest Communities for Children site in Adelaide, and he's authored a chapter on theoretical foundations of collective impact applications in the book Using Collective Impact to Bring Community Change. And he co-authored the chapter on facilitating strategic governance in building stronger communities with children and families. He's currently the chief executive at Playgroups SA, and he has a busy morning this morning, but he's taken some time to join us. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Carl. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Apart from that introduction, what's most important is that I'm a dad to 3 children, and I love music, and I'm thinking about a bit of a collaboration with Robert on some kind of rap track. I think we can do something there, Robert. Anyway, thank you, Geraldine, for that presentation. I caught most of it. Absolutely inspiring and fantastic. I've only got 5 minutes. I just can't get too nuanced in what I'm talking about here, but I'm just going to wrap it through as quick as I can. Next, have we got the slides up? Oh, maybe they're there somewhere. Yeah, okay, thank you. So if we can go next slide, please. So I've got the very dull task of talking about decision making and governance. And there is a definition for governance. I'm not going to read it because it is pretty boring. Unfortunately, it seems to, cover, what we all need to do in our organisations. And I did put in capitals deliberately boring, as it may be for some, though being a bit of a policy wonk, I don't mind it. So governance really, it provides the framework for policies, procedures, financial and risk management, the role of committees and individuals. They're all identified in these structures, giving us a bit of an insight to where we might be able to look for change. Now, the governance will apply to a single organisation, government agencies and departments, private enterprises. There's lots of rules and regulatory frameworks that we all need to keep on top of, unfortunately, at times. The question I want to explore today is sort of what role can governance and leadership play in healing communities, prefaced on the notion that we are all leaders. And I want to zoom out for a second and ask us to visualize the system that we're working in and look at it in different layers. Next slide, please. We have this political system at the top and public policy where decisions are made that affect all of the citizens in our country, in our communities and societies. The decisions affect different regions or local council areas across our country. And there's this complex interplay of governance, rules, who has authority to do what in whatever area that they're working in. Within the regions, we then have these places and communities, and they're often left to self-organise, being left behind, I feel at times, by government and the markets. Finally, we're down to that individual level. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one thing we love to do as humans is reduce our understanding of the world down to the smallest constituent parts. What is an atom made of? Neutrons, protons, electrons. Some might go, oh, but in a neutron, that's made up of quarks as well. They're these tiny, even tinier kind of bits and pieces. What's a cell made of? RNA, DNA, mitochondria. There's a few other things there, cytoplasm, whatever. Now, while we can gain important insights from these approaches, when we zoom in too much, we can forget the importance of the holistic approach. The medical profession has done this brilliantly. You've got a specialist for every part of the human body, right? Important, but we also need to consider things through that holistic view. Rules and governance are a bit the same. They zoom in on processes, compliance, templates to be completed. We can easily lose sight of the system, lose sight in the system of the very people and communities we are serving. And we can certainly reflect on some of what Geraldine was talking about there too. You see, governance can be both an impediment and an enabler to supporting and building healing communities. But on the ground, we're out there working with families. I'd say the families and children, they probably don't care much for these rules and compliance requirements. They're out there perhaps looking for a bit of hope, looking for those of us to walk alongside them through these challenges. And sometimes it's up to us to help navigate and, I don't know, completely unpack the system and start again. Now, what we're contending with here, next slide please, that this is, I think, for a lot of us practitioners on the ground working with families that we need to contend with. Just as we break down, I was talking about the constituents of a cell or an atom, we do the same with our societies, and it starts at politics. right? And it has an effect on the services that we're trying to deliver in community. The services have rules and eligibility criteria. At the top of our political system, we have an executive or the cabinet, or the ministers that make decisions for the government on day to day. Each minister is assigned their portfolio of infrastructure, defence, planning, signals, health, education, human services. We can start seeing things being reduced into different parts. And then each of these ministers have their own departments. And then within those departments, there's agencies, all with specific functions. Within the agencies, they're responsible for different programs. Now, in Department of Social Services, we might be familiar with some of these: Communities for Children, Family and Relationship Services, HIPPY, Parenting and Children's Services. Now, a few of those programs are even further broken down into an almost cellular level, and not all of them are focused on the healing or trauma responsive practices. So when you when you begin to look at the sort of tender processes and competition for funding, healing communities can sometimes seem to be the last thing on leaders' minds. It seems to me, sadly, to come down to the dollar and demonstrating some sustainable future for each organisation. And I am guilty of that to some part, a very small part I'd hope, but always looking for those bridges that we can create there. You see, healing communities, trauma responsive practices must be embedded in our understanding across the sector, from older leaders in NGOs, from NGOs to private enterprises. It's about having everyone around the table building that understanding of what's going on here. So I'd like to see some risk taking, a trauma responsive stewardship in all of our areas, from political, social and financial systems working together to make their contribution to healing our communities. What about some type of trauma responsive governance framework? I'm getting to the end of it now. The risks of not acting and not investing in healing our communities must be understood. We've heard this all before. We really need to flip this hierarchical model on its head. We need our communities to be providing the leadership, our communities that are healing to be making the decisions, and the decision makers to act on the hopes and dreams of our communities. Right here, right now, with COVID and everything going on, we are continually facing huge challenges ahead. We need to stand up and be counted. Next slide, please, and it is the final slide. So all of us, including those in our communities who are healing, have so much to offer. Let's make some noise, deconstruct the now, and redefine a governance structure that puts the decisions closest to the people who will be most affected by the outcome of a new policy or program. We've heard some wonderful examples during this symposium of programs, people's practice theories that are all on the right track. But we certainly do have a lot of work to do to build and sustain a governance model for healing communities. It's time to move from silos to symphonies. And a quote I once heard, and I don't know if it can be attributed to the artist Ben Harper, but he did sing in a song once, "When the people lead, the leaders they will have to follow. And all of their lies and their alibis they will have to swallow." But I know I can't sing. Anyway, that kind of brings me to a very an end. But I do want to just say a quick thank you to Carl, Sarah, all of the speakers and everyone that has contributed to making this symposium happen, and hope that there'll be some takeaways from that today. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig, especially for the song. That was great. And also for what you said about, flipping the hierarchical model on its head and turning it around, and decision making at the local level. And that's a lot about what we're about here. We're about looking at how we can get decisions made at local levels in local communities that are going to impact those communities, and how we can get people at the top of the hierarchy to kind of cooperate with that and work with that. Thanks, Craig. I'm going to hand you over now to Dr. Ted Evans, who is going to lead a discussion on the whole issue of evaluation and what kind of evaluation we need in terms of what works and how we can better develop what we do with an evaluation process which helps us to improve what we're doing and helps us to monitor and develop further what works. So Ted Evans is a coordinator of the Northwest Adelaide Communities for Children site. He's passionate about quality evaluation and has previously worked as a Senior Policy Officer and Regional Coordinator with the South Australian Government Department for Communities and Social Inclusion. He's also a casual academic at Flinders University College of Nursing and Health Sciences. So Ted, I'm going to hand it over to you, and then you can introduce the other people who are going to be presenting, and we can learn some more about what works and how we can make it work better. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks so much, Carl. So what is evaluation and what does it mean to you? Throughout the 3 symposium sessions, the importance of families with children's sense of belonging, safety and inclusion have been emphasised. So how can an evaluation positively contribute, and what does an evaluation mean to you? Evaluation, according to the Australian Institute of Family Studies, is the process of determining whether and how your program achieves its objectives. From a human rights perspective, families with children have a right to receive high quality services, and the only way to really know this, according to AFS, is through evaluations. For this session, reflections from Elise Parker from the Salvation Army at Logan and Jane Swanson from the Salvation Army at Salisbury demonstrate the importance of evaluation approaches which are based on principles, including belonging, safety and inclusion. So the first presentation is by Elise.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks for the introduction. And Jingari, everyone. I'm Elise. I'm representing the Communities for Children team in Logan in Queensland with the Salvation Army. I'd also like to acknowledge the elders of the land that I'm speaking on today, but also the land from which the research that I'll be talking about has come from, and that's the Yagara and the Yugambeh speaking people. I'd like to acknowledge their wisdom and their guidance that supported the work that we do every day, and the many community members and leaders who help with the design and delivery of our research. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Wendy Gunthorpe, who led this piece of work for us just so exceptionally well. We had such a great time working with her, and we've learned an exceptional amount from her as a human and a brilliant researcher. The evaluation report was available as pre-reading for this session, so I thought I'd just focus on the evaluation itself rather than the findings today. So that question, what does evaluation mean to us? And for our team, we wanted this piece of evaluation to be an extension of who we are and how we work within our community. We were interested in looking at the importance of relationships and how relationships serve as a conduit for people to access spaces and also help with the design of service delivery in our space. And we thought our research methodology needed to be in line with that as well, and also respect the relationships that we have here. We work in a community where people are constantly being mined for their information, and often it's in exchange for things like food, essential healthcare, and access to the community activities that are in place for their very benefit. That isn't a bad thing necessarily, but very rarely are the research and data collection methods developed in consultation with the very people who are expected to hand over their information. There's also huge research fatigue in our community of Logan, which I'm sure is like many other communities. Families aren't particularly enthusiastic about participating in another research project, and practitioners aren't often thrilled at the thought of having to use their workspaces and their relationships that they've invested in building with families as a conduit for other people to gather data. So we wanted to demonstrate that while research at times is unavoidable and sometimes is actually incredibly valuable when it's done really well, can be designed in a way that respects the underlying science of data collection as well as the human side of requesting information and utilising that data well. We wanted those collecting the information, our frontline workers, to feel a sense of pride and enthusiasm about what they were participating in, and for our participants to feel respected and to maintain a sense of ownership over their story and their identity. So of the 16 months that Dr. Gunthorpe spent with us, the majority of that time was spent co-designing every step of the research and evaluation tools with our elders and our First Nations community members, with practitioners in our community centres and with the families who attended the spaces. Dr. Gunthorpe also was adamant that she would employ local people as research assistants. So she trained and hired an elder, a parent from one of our community centres, and 2 Aboriginal practitioners. As well as facilitating a sense of community ownership over the process, this also meant that families were often engaging with people that they recognised or knew or could relate to very quickly when they were telling their stories. We were also really careful to use language that was inclusive and relatable. So, for example, we asked adults in our spaces how many children they often cared for, rather than asking parents how many kids they had. And that was about respecting some of the really complex care arrangements that sit around some of our kids in Logan. The connection mapping tool that we used, and there's a picture of this on the slide, allowed participants to piece together their journey about how they had connected with our community centres and what relationships had served as a conduit to connect with the centre, and then also what relationships were developed in the space. The use of artefacts to represent different parts or different descriptors meant that we weren't relying on a proficiency in English for people to participate. And having our elder attend whenever the research assistants administered the tool with families provided a real sense of safety and security, particularly for our First Nations families. The picture on the slide is one participant's journey to connect with their community centre. And as a really integral part of our evaluation, the information that was collected through this piece of work was fed back to practitioners and families through a series of presentations by Dr. Gunthorpe, as well as posters and handouts with summaries of the information in language that was accessible and made sense in the local context. Participants were also offered copies of their stories of connection to the space to keep for themselves. So these photos were printed for all of the families and they could take them home with them as well. The feedback we got from the people who participated was just so positive. It was way more than we were anticipating, which was great. The success of this tool itself was particularly evident from the large numbers of males who took part in research, as well as the First Nations families and those who did not have English as their first language. And those groups of people were notoriously underrepresented in a lot of the research in this space. The practitioners are really thrilled to be able to share the results of the families in their centres, and they put the posters up and handed the pictures out. And they hosted morning teas when Wendy came to talk about the research. And so many of the practitioners had thanked us for even inviting them to share their experiences. For us as a team, this was such a great experience. It was very different to anything that we'd participated in before. And we love that it honoured the relationships that we've spent the last 15 years building in community. I would encourage anyone who's looking to do research and evaluation to really engage in a proper co-design and co-delivery process with the people that you're hoping to engage with. Your timeline will blow out. It is not simple. It'll change 100,000 times, and it's nowhere near as easy as using a typical survey research method. But this is an opportunity to demonstrate respectful research practices, and it will give you data that represents voice across all of community, and it will provide you with data that's relevant and meaningful to all of the parties who are involved. And what was important for us is that it gave us an opportunity to really boost the reputation of research outside of academia and to honour the participants and the services in our process. Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Elise. And it's an absolutely amazing report. I'd really encourage everyone, if you have the opportunity to read through it, there's some wonderful learnings in terms of valuation research, co-design throughout. Now also it's Jane's turn, so Jane's going to do a presentation for us.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you, Elise. I'm always inspired when I hear your process, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak today. I want to start by asking you the question, what is it that you're looking to answer with your evaluation? What are the outcomes you're looking for in your healing community? Sometimes we ask a simple linear question like whether cooking skills have improved as a result of attending a cooking class. And this can be a simple pre and post survey, but if we want to know whether attendance at a child and family centre, for instance, improves people's sense of belonging, then it's not a simple linear question. We're dealing with a complex system full of interactions with different people, various opportunities for support, and many different contributing factors. If you added up all the parts, the individual activities, the sum of the parts would be less than the whole. And I think Geraldine mentioned that really beautifully too. In other words, that informal interactions, role modelling, responsiveness to immediate need or crisis, and the interconnectedness of the activities all provide a rich environment of support, which is yet another layer beyond the individual activities themselves. So how do we evaluate this complex system? In our Communities for Children journey, we've done a variety of evaluations, and you can find them on our website or in Chapter 8 of the Building Stronger Communities with Children and Families book. But I want to just focus specifically on evaluation of Family Zone in 2011, which was undertaken by UniSA with Alexandra Diamond and Dr. Elspeth McGuinness. A mixed method approach was used, and my part of the process was to be privileged to be able to speak with 35 parents in the one-to-one interviews. The individual interviews provided data which was both quantitative and qualitative. Although specific and more open questions were asked, participants were free to share as much or as little as they liked, and I aimed to be sensitive and encourage an unhurried and participant-directed conversation wherever possible. As was so evident in Elisa's presentation, it's a powerful thing for someone to be invited to share their story. And in this case too, the parents were very willing to share. It was actually quite humbling how much they were willing to share. And this method of data collection reflects our practice principle to empower parents to lead in the development of supportive communities and to listen and to treat the stories that people share with respect. The importance of this was also spoken about by Judy Atkinson on the first day. It honours the value of our relationships with the people we're listening to, and relationships have been a key theme through the conversations also. Let's stay with the question of whether attending a child and family centre improves people's sense of belonging. The comments that came out of the interviews showed that mums valued sharing with other mums and valued sharing knowledge and experience informally while engaged in a group activity. Connection and friendship were key themes that came through the evaluation. Sarah, can we have the next slide, please? Some of the comments, the report stated the data indicate that Family Zone Hub has had a significant role in breaking down isolation for families, with nearly 8 in 10 making new friends at the site. More than 90% of respondents reporting they had 3 or more friends to speak to. And some of the other comments. I was alone here, my country is India. Here I was alone, I needed some friends, so I came here. My friends told me about this. And normally I stayed at home. For immigration people, they don't have many friends, so I was very lonely. That's the next slide. These programs are good for me and him, so we enjoy them and are very happy. These quotes are all a lovely reflection of the importance of friendships between parents and children and show a sense of belonging with the people they meet. The most common response when asked if coming to Family Zone had changed anything for them as parents was that they received help from others. In follow-up interviews 4 months later, which involved a little over half the women, the most commonly nominated change was that having social contact in a safe space had built their confidence as parents. I've shared this focus on belonging because it shows that by evaluating holistically, looking for the impact on the whole person and the integration of the whole system, we can see a strength of the model that we may not see if we evaluate each activity in its own silo. In a child and family centre, there is great value to the informal interactions, role modelling and relationships formed in a safe and trusting space. And seeing this through an evaluation encourages us to value it and be intentional to create opportunities for it, as well as the structured activities we may facilitate. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you again, Jane, too. Again, it's been a real privilege working together with Elise and Jane to look through the evaluations that they've been involved in and just the great learnings that have occurred. These reflections by Elise and Jane have highlighted the importance of evaluation approaches, which are based on principles that positively contribute to families with children. So what does it mean to us? Well, belonging, prioritising relationships, the authenticity, being honest, safety and trusting, welcoming and respectful relationships, and inclusion, in which co-design, in which families with children are directing and sharing what they have found, has been absolutely crucial. We hope you've enjoyed the presentation. There are further readings provided and our contact details are also available. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. That was fantastic. Now we're just going to go over straight to Caroline, who's been monitoring the questions, and questions can be asked of all the people, I guess, who are online who've contributed. But Caroline's got some questions, I'm sure. So Caroline?
Hello, thanks Carol. Welcome everyone. Another fantastic session. Thank you very much to everyone that spoke. I just want to begin by encouraging people to continue asking questions, but also to point out that Pablo will be in the session, and any recommendations, ideas, suggestions or questions regarding the action plan can also be brought forward between this during this time. And I just want to let you know that we're going to kind of finish the question time at about 12 o'clock so that we can go back to Carl for a bit of a wrap up. So once again, we had some really fabulous things. Just a bit of reflection from Geraldine. There was some, somebody said that the beautiful memory about, breathing across and breathing together was lovely. You were inspirational and a positive frame of leadership was given. So thank you, Geraldine. Craig, lots of good things around just a lovely presentation on what you spoke about, and that the silos to symphonies was a really good thing. There was a great emphasis, and you were willing to take risks and turn things upside down. Co-design needs to begin as a routine practice. Powerful words. Risk-taking is instrumental in working with the unknown. Elise and Jane, just some fabulous points around lots of different, the different ways that evaluation kind of happens. And I just want to go to you, Elise, because there was a specific question. So there was two. The first question, Elise, was what does co-deliver mean from an evaluation perspective? And the other one was more in detail, so I'm actually going to go back to it. Elise, it talks about the methodologies utilised sound fantastic, but the resources put to the project with Wendy as a consultant and 3 research assistants seems quite incredible. What was the cost of this evaluation? For many C4C sites, the required financial investment is a real barrier. I'm interested in how, in this evidence-based world, how we can advocate for appropriate funding.
Yeah.
Get over to you, Elise.
Thank you. I was just shooting in a message to Melissa as well. Really good questions. Look, this was definitely an investment on our behalf. It did cost us significantly less than going with a university partner, although we were quite adamant, and so was Wendy, about where the investment of the funds would go. So making sure that we had research assistants, and they weren't all employed full-time for the whole period. They were employed casually just on short-term pieces of work, and that worked for them. That was something they negotiated together. And a lot of the resources, some of the materials we had for that was all in kind. There were lots of low-cost parts to that. So anyone who's interested in talking about those little bits and pieces, I'm more than happy to speak to in more detail. In terms of the co-design piece of work, co-deliver, often that was about having different members of our community networks participating in either doing surveys or chatting with people. Again, some of the co-delivery for our programs means, like in terms of children and family programs, we invite not just practitioners but our family volunteers as well, so parents or local leaders or students, to participate in a lot of the training that we would do. So for example, our evidence-based training. which is part of the C4C work. And the idea is that as different parts of the community are participating in that research, and again, that's an investment, the training, that's an investment on behalf of Communities for Children that we've decided to make quite deliberately. That suits our space, and we think that's important for us to do, and we have the capacity to. It means that co-design is quite genuine. So of all the people who are looking at designing and delivering a piece of work, they've got similar pieces of knowledge, they've got a common language that they're using together. And yeah, again, if anyone wants more detail on that, I'm more than happy to chat further.
Thank you, Elise. And we did have another question for you, Jane, which was, it was a question around wondering how you framed the questions to get those feedbacks, as the feedback comments were so positive.
Yeah, and I just did a quick typed answer to that as well. And I think having questions that are open, you know, what have you gained by coming here? How has it made a difference for you or for your children? Have you made more friends? It just starts a conversation, you know, and if they know they're really safe and welcome in that space, which they do in that environment, and then someone is inviting them into a conversation to share what their experience has been. It was really amazing how willing and engaged and just, you know, really wanting to tell those stories. So it wasn't like pulling hen's teeth. It was really just having the open questions where they feel safe and really welcome to share their story.
Thanks, Jane. And Daniel just asked, from the sessions and materials, the healing power of community seems to be highly related to a sense of belonging. Measured belonging or a sense of belonging, you can point us towards what programs work and what doesn't. And he asked, does anyone have a framework used to measure this? And Elspeth just talked about perhaps the early years learning framework is grounded in being, belonging and becoming. Does anybody else have any other points that they'd like to make to that? Cool. And then Craig, just a question for you, if you're still on, and we hope that you are. Kathy just asked if you could talk more about the barriers between participants in communities and services. What work has been done in this space?
I don't think Craig...
Is he gone?
He's actually double booked himself today, so he hasn't got a commitment. But look, what I can do is I saw the question and I can just refer you to the chapter that he wrote in the book. And I found a little section on it. And this is what he says. He says, a service systems approach is reliant on collaborative pathways being developed between organisations, service providers and communities and organisations involved. And it's dependent upon the quality of the relationship, the leadership of the organisations involved, and the numbers and types of strategies used to enhance the collaboration's functions. Consequently, the role of key collaborators working collaboratively requires mutual respect and alignment of several crucial characteristics pivotal to the organisation and personnel interactions. In other words, it's a lot about relationships, and there are a lot of barriers between different agencies and organisations and governments, and a lot of work needs to be done in terms of communicating and sharing. And as Elise said before, that can take a lot of time, but it really is a matter of building relationship, building trust. I think it was Stephen Covey who said that, you know, you can only do things at the speed of trust. And if trust breaks down, then it's very hard to get things moving, hard to get people connecting with services and services becoming welcoming and friendly through that relationship between the collaborating partners. So that's a really critical element. And I'm sure Craig would have a lot more to say about that, but it's a good question, Kathy, and it's something that we need to continue to work on. And I think Geraldine has highlighted something of what that looks like in terms of being able to, you know, rise beyond yourself and beyond your own organisation's goals and to consider the needs of families. Kathleen Wilson would have loved to have been with us, but that's her priority. Her priority is the families, is the children and families, and she won't get too involved in seminars and symposiums, but her focus is always on putting the families first, and that's just so critical in this whole space.
Thanks, Carl. We didn't actually have any other questions at this point, but if they come through, we can get back to anybody that's got any further questions. So I might just hand over to you, Carl, for a wrap up. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, we've got a few extra minutes, so you can, if you've got any other questions, you can just keep sending them to Caroline. She can interrupt what's going on with me. So, where do we go with all this? We've started on a journey, and the journey is really supposed to lead towards developing an action plan for your community. How do we do this? Let's go back to what Judy Atkinson said. Let's start with her. She said, start small. We can all start small. We can all start in the situation where we are. Our roles vary and differ, and some of them have more strategic function and can be more broadly implemented, but some are more basic in our own childcare centre, our own family centre, our own children's centre, our own playgroup. So we can go basic and start small. And as Geraldine pointed out too, we need to begin by looking at ourselves. She quoted Otto Scharmer, and Otto Scharmer says that the big blind spot in this whole space is ourselves. And the quality of what change happens depends on the quality of what's happening internally within leaders and where we're at internally in the way we're able to respond to others. So it requires courage to face up to our self-interest motivation, the interests of our organisations. And it also requires faith to believe that it's possible to change, and also it involves a desire to see others succeed, to see everybody, to see other organisations, other communities succeeding in what they're doing, and be able to rise above beyond our own. So in terms of developing an action plan, we can do three things, or we can do one of three things. First one is we can go basic. And if you want to go basic, you can use Pablo's template that he outlined to us. And I think Sarah is going to make that available to us, and she makes everything available whenever we need it, which was pretty simple. And we can go sophisticated. And Jane's done a template which has, I think, been derived from something the Australian Institute of Family Studies developed. But it also includes outcomes in terms of what we're trying to do. So they're obviously important to us and they're important to government. So we can go basic, we can go sophisticated, or we can go complex. And if you want to go complex, hopefully the federal government will continue to develop the Communities for Children initiative and other similar initiatives. We can look at the kind of issues that are involved in that. Again, we haven't got time to go into that, but there is a chapter on that in Building Stronger Communities with Children and Families, on how to develop a strategic plan across a community and how to get a local group of stakeholders together and develop that plan. And there's also information in there about multi-level governance, which Craig has also contributed, and how that works. So that really does involve, transpiring, breathing across a lot of different organisations to bring that plan together. The next thing we can do is develop a community of practice. We can build a network of practitioners who share your vision to build healing communities. Now, if you've shown an interest in this symposium, you are interested in the concept of building healing communities, and see that if whatever we do, it doesn't really matter what individual programs we do, what individual activities we do. If people don't end up in healing communities, they just become more and more traumatised, re-traumatised, and we don't make a lot of progress. So we need people who have a heart, I guess, to want to get together and work together to build communities of practice where we learn from each other. One of the deep dive groups, I think it's the schools one, expressed interest in keeping going, working together, continuing to communicate with each other. So that's something that you might like to do. You might be able to like to share each other's emails and so forth and keep a deep dive going. Or you might be able to get together with other people who've been perhaps involved with this symposium, or others who are interested in this symposium. You might want to share with others from the videos, from the Zoom videos of the symposium, with others in your local community, to develop a community of practice and keep working at what we can do to build healing communities. So you can take materials from this symposium back to your organisation and have a conversation. Who can work together on this? How can we further develop the action plan in our local community? We can also learn from other initiatives. There are a lot of similar initiatives that we can learn from. When we started out with Communities for Children in Salisbury, we learned a lot from some of the initiatives that were begun through having Dr. Fraser Mustard out here as a thinker in residence in South Australia. He came from Canada, and they're the people who developed the Australian Early Development, or they developed the Canadian Early, it was called the Early Development Index, developed in Canada, and now it's become the Australian Early Development Census for us and our situation here. But he had a lot of influence across a lot of different organisations. And one of the initiatives that started around that time was what is now Cafe Enfield Children's Centre. And so we looked at that and we learned a lot from what was developed there. And you probably have other similar initiatives nearby, or you can connect with some of those. Again, the invitation from Kathleen Wilson is if you want to look at what's happening at Family Zone, for example, and you come to South Australia, drop in for a cup of coffee and have a chat. And that's really what her forte is, and she will welcome you there, as she does with anybody who comes there for support and help. We've also learned a lot from the South Australian Child Protection Service co-design, which we've had over the last couple of years, in South Australia, in response to a Royal Commission into abuse of children in South Australia. And that's where we really got the whole concept of trauma responsive practice. That was one of the things that they came up with. It's not just about being trauma informed, but it's about being responsive to people who've been traumatised and how we can do that. So that's been it's worth looking at some of the materials that they've developed. And we've also learned a lot from the National Early Years Summit, which was held earlier this year in Melbourne in March, and it came up with a blueprint of some of the things that we can do, and it talked about the concept of listening to First Nations people, and it talked about the concept of developing powerful local action groups to make a difference. So some of these principles that have developed out of that have been incorporated into this symposium. And so there's a lot, and there's an ongoing conversation, so you can connect with that through ARACI, Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth, and their website. We've learned a lot from other initiatives too in the UK, the Sure Start program in the UK, and there are books around and there are other materials around on the web about that. And also the USA, there's been some initiatives, for about 40, 50 years through Head Start. We've learned a lot from that. And there's also a lot of material also from the Nordic countries, and they've been developing family centres really for 40 years. We found in the UK, Penn Green was really helpful for us because they were involving involving parents in their children's learning. Margie Wally's work, she was brought out to South Australia as a thinker in residence. So we've learned a lot from them, and a lot of what they are putting out there is really helpful too. And there's also the Centre for Community Child Health in Melbourne, Australian Institute of Family Studies, Telethon Kids Research Institute. In South Australia, we've got another group called Healthy Development Adelaide, who share some useful research findings with people in communities for free, and that's been really helpful to us as well. So there are lots of other initiatives that are really helpful. Some questions are coming up about, all right, for Ted and Caroline.
Yeah, we got that one, Ted. So I guess the other one is about the intelligence, about the future of C4C.
Well, just let me, perhaps before we go into that, just say that it's important to evaluate what you're doing, as we've talked about, and there will be an evaluation of this virtual symposium sent out to you, which will come out in the form of Google Forms. But yeah, any intelligence about the future for C4C? Look, I think we've just been asked to do a activity work plan report by the department, and I'd say the questions in there are hopeful because the kind of questions that are being asked are questions about how we can further develop and what's working, what isn't working, and how we can further shape what can work in the future. So I don't know whether anybody else out there are quite a number of Communities for Children sites participating in this. If any of you have got any intelligence about the future for C4C, you can let us know. You can tune in and you can unmute and you can talk to us now. Anybody out there know anything more? I mean,
certainly welcome it, Carl. Anything beyond the 30th of June next year would be very, very, very helpful. Any information for sure.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ted. So, yeah, we would welcome that. But, you know, a few years ago, we were a little bit pessimistic, but I think the signs are a lot more positive now. But I think it'll be reshaped in some form. There's a lot more talk about place-based approaches. That's been the focus of the department in the last couple of years. So it could be shaped in that direction. But it's a bit of a wait-and-see space at this stage. Okay. So we need to, but one of the things, I guess, with the activity work plan that they're asking us to do, the report on it, it's really timely, I guess, that we've had this symposium and time to talk about some of these issues, because some of the questions that have been raised, we could be addressed in those reports. And also, all of your contributions to the action plan, which Nova are developing, will be helpful in this space. So we really want to encourage you to send in your action plans for what you're doing in your community. So Pablo can include that in the research that he's doing and include it in developing and shaping the report that we're going to put out. So we hope that report is something which, on a broad base, can say, well, you know, these are some of the things that we've learned over the last 15 years, and this is kind of some of the direction that we sense will produce better outcomes for children and families. And so we're trying to synthesize that and put it together. So your contributions through doing a basic, sophisticated or complex action plan, sending it to us and sending it to Pablo, you can just send it to us, I guess, through Sarah, and we'll send it on to Pablo, would be really, really helpful.
Sorry, that'll all be part of the same Google form with the evaluation. So just to make things a bit easier for everyone. Okay, thanks, Sarah. She's making it a lot easier for everybody. So that'll come out with the Google form. And also, you know, we need to keep the conversation going. We have a web page now at the Children Communities Connections Learning Network web page, which will have information from this symposium, and you can link with the videos there, and further information will be there. That's salisburyc4c.org.au/learning network. And some of you, Twitter, you're not great users of Twitter, I see. Twitter's become a pretty toxic space for a lot of people, but it can be used for good. So, you know, we can still use that platform. But I think the platform that we found has been most helpful, particularly since they brought in the option of putting videos up on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been really useful because there's been a lot of conversation going on there, and we've had lots of engagement with LinkedIn. And I think already about 300 people have accessed the video from the first session of this symposium on LinkedIn. So, you know, you can share the videos that are out there and get other people thinking about the kinds of questions that we've been looking at. Some of you may have other platforms which you find useful. Anybody want to ask about that? Have anything to share about that, please do. Any other questions, Caroline? No? Okay, she's shaking her head.
No, not at this point. Just a lot more positive around another inspiring, engaging session. I found all the sessions great, and it cemented our thinking of having a program led by the community. It's just so difficult consulting and connecting through COVID. Difficult when we can't be face to face, but very valuable and wonderful symposium. So.
Yeah, COVID is obviously a big issue right across the board. I had a really good conversation with Cindy Lee Harper from Cardinia Communities for Children's side, who's been engaged with this symposium. And one of the things that they're talking about there is a program called Thriving in Families. So a lot of the work that we've been doing around groups coming together and meeting live and supporting each other, you know, we're really having to do work around helping families in their home isolation situation function, particularly Victoria. That's a huge issue, but also in other spaces. So that's a bit of a shift, but hopefully we'll be able to go back to more of a communal, face-to-face experience before too long. Well, if there's no other questions, it's just up to now to say thank you to a few people. Just thank you to the people who have sponsored this event, which has been fantastic. especially the South Australian Department of Human Services, who've contributed to some funding, to UniSA Education Futures, who have been really amazing. I mean, we talked about some people raised the question about the cost of evaluation, and we haven't wanted to put huge amounts into it, but you know, we've worked with UniSA for a long time through this, and they've been fantastic, because people like Elspeth McGuinness and Victoria Whitington and Beck Neal and some of the team out there, that their heart is into the whole thing of, you know, building healing communities for children, building trauma and putting trauma-informed healing communities for children, and their work has been fantastic. It's been fantastic to work with them without blowing the budget, and being able to put most of the budget into support and services for families, which we think is really ethically important and vital. Also, thank you to Northwest Adelaide C4C. Caroline comes from there and Ted comes from there. They're our neighbours over to the west, and so it's been fantastic to work with them and we're thinking obviously a lot about how we can improve things and work together better locally, and make it better for families and children to be supported in our area. And also to all the other partners, I won't go through them all, but you've probably seen the logos on the material that's gone out, and a big thank you to all of those, and also to each of the organisations that you represent. If you've been involved with this symposium, your organisation has given you permission to do that and encouraged you to do that, and so thank your organisation, and go back to your organisation and do some work on that action plan and send them in, and we'll do some work on that, and we'll send out, hopefully before too long, hopefully within a couple of weeks, an action plan. Now that might be asking too much from Pablo, but within not too long we'll send out an action plan that you can use as a master plan if you like. But remember that each situation is different. Your local situation is always different, as Alexandra reminded us early on. So it needs to come from your local community, but it needs to work in concert with everything else that's happening around the country. And hopefully this time has been able to bring together some of the action that has been happening around the country, and we can support each other to do it better. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for your participation, and hopefully we can keep connecting with each other and talking with each other, and we can see some action happen in this country for those who most need it. Thank you.